Hello everybody, Volen here, in pursuit of art. Today I'm going to take a question because I think a lot of people struggle with this stuff. There's a lot of people that write to me in the comments and they talk a lot about depression, a lot about frustration, a lot about anxiety. I find it kind of ironic in a not very good way that something that starts out as something that was inspiring to a lot of people and something that gave them joy and they wanted to pursue because it was something that they could see themselves doing. It was something that was inspiring them when they thought about them being able to do that as well. It was something that just thinking about it gave them intense pleasure of when they would be able to use it for whatever purpose they would want to do it, like this power that they could acquire. At the same time though, once people actually start working on it and it starts coming slow and they're not sure how to progress and they also kind of get stuck in a rut and they're not sure what to do, a lot of times that power of potential of what they thought they could do sort of turns around, and then people actually start inverting that and it becomes something that's holding them back, something that is now oppressing them instead of inspiring them. And I get a lot of comments like that. A lot of people have this thing. So I don't care if you just feel it a little bit or a lot, you are definitely not alone. Like the artist, writer, the person that does something sort of coming out of nothing at any stage is going to be struggling with some of those things. It's inevitable. There's always going to be unknown problems. Like this is part of the job essentially of being an artist, is that you're going to be struggling with something that doesn't yet exist, that you need to originate, that you need to make, you need to create it out of nothing. I actually find it kind of cool that studying and learning all this stuff, this is essentially like, apart from it being like your test, your proving grounds, it's also your first ever problem of you having to come up with something that doesn't yet exist. That skill that you want to acquire, that doesn't exist yet. So that's like your first art problem. This thing that doesn't yet exist, how do you make it happen? How much will you persevere? How much research will you do? How much time will you put in it? All of those things. How strong is your character? How much are you willing to give of yourself to get to this thing? And again, just relating it back to art, something that doesn't exist, a landscape that's not there yet, an environment, a world, a character, a person, a story that's not yet been told. What happens in all those different, when you can't tie all the loose ends? What happens with all those characters? What happens with, is it just going to be a redundant story? Are you going to manage to get through and just explore some sort of new ground, etc.? It's basically everything related to art starts with the actual studying of art. It's going to be the same problem that you'll be reliving later on over and over. Uncertainty if it's going to work out. Not sure if anyone else cares, if anyone's going to look at it, if people are going to laugh at it, if they're going to enjoy it, if they're going to relate. It's basically, in a way, it's even just being human. Like, are people going to understand me and relate to me? Or am I just going to make something that people are going to throw like pies in my face? Which I actually think is kind of cool. Because I don't really have a lot of carbs, so if someone threw a pie in my face, I think that'd be pretty pleasurable. I'd probably just try and scrape it off and take it home. Anyway though, I'm gonna read you this question out, and this is something that happens again to a lot of people. A lot of it comes from false ideas of just what's the road supposed to look like? Like, how much exactly are you supposed to be given to it? What is enough and what is productive? So I want to talk to you about this stuff because it's really important, because for a lot of people this is sort of the junction where this either turns into depression and anxiety and frustration, or it becomes something that you understand that I just need to do this thing my own way. I just need to do this thing the way that it works for me, not how it worked for other people. There's value in other people's stories, but you also have to understand that a lot of the myths that are sort of going around, they're just the more entertaining stories of someone's journey. Let me just read the question. This will make more sense to you. So every time I set a new goal, I start slow. 1 hour and a half maximum. That's cool. Then I build it up and it's to about 5 hours now. I do take breaks and everything, but it always seems like I'm not giving all I can. I'm barely being able to hold the 5 hours. This is going to be a point that we're going to make. Just being able to hold. Like it's some sort of like invasion. It's like the Lord of the Rings or something, where you just have to like hold the gate. This Minas Tirith, the troll is out, hold it. It's not really how it goes. It's supposed to be sustainable. Let's move on though. I don't really think I'll ever be a professional artist with that inability to hold. It's every time the same story. The more I try to push, the more depressed I get, until eventually I drop my studies, and it's making me sad. And no wonder, because you're kind of going against your brain, really, so you're fighting yourself on all this stuff. The fact that I can't give all my hours to art, I feel weak, like I don't belong in this career, even though I want it so much, and it's not really a burnt out feeling. It's different. And it's true, it isn't a burnt out feeling. A burnt out feeling would be I just can't stand any more of this stuff. This one is more frustration with self in a way because of unrealistic expectations, or just not really sure about even how realistic it is, what the image is that you have in your head about how it's supposed to work out. So I don't stop drawing for weeks or months. That's awesome. But at the same time, I feel depressed about myself for not being able to hold up more than 3 hours steadily. I'm scared that I'm not going to make it. Okay, this is going to be the question. And since I've already answered it, I'm kind of happy to say that Cowboy Tanaka hopefully is doing better now, with some minor adjustments after that. So just swapping a little bit of the schedule around and just not really going by what people's stories are, but going with what actually works. So let me go into some brain stuff now for you guys. So I'm just gonna get this off. So where do a lot of these stories come from? They come from when people are either being interviewed or they're making a video. They're kind of recounting their story. They're telling about certain parts of their experience. And it only makes sense that if you're asked about something, you make it entertaining. You don't want to just be, well, how did you do this thing that was really very hard and crazy looking when you kind of look at it zoomed out at the big picture? How did you do that? It makes sense that if you're telling a story to an audience, you make it exciting for them. You don't just say that you just put one foot in front of the other daily for a very long time, and regardless of what happened, you just kept to that commitment and you just kept going. That's mundane, and it's not really a good story, and it's not inspiring. So the thing with inspiration though is that if you try and push people too hard, they kind of break. I've seen that many times. I've done that to many people, especially when I was doing more fitness gym type stuff. It's very easy to not sort of understand someone else's limits and to like push them a bit further than what they're ready for. And then you put them off from what otherwise could be a pretty productive process. So it would make sense that if you're going up a mountain, you don't just say that you just walked for like many days, like you just walked for 100 days and on the 100th day you were kind of there. And then ask you how did it feel, and yeah, it was cool. It was like the 100th day, I was like a bit tired and hungry, and I had to walk down for 100 more days, so I wasn't really excited. No one asked you about the peak of the mountain. It was awesome. Like, I'm there. I had to eat a granny on the way. I met this granny and she was like handing out apples to people in the forest, which is unlikely it's gonna happen, but it was like a Red Riding Hood moment. And then I ate her. Like, I took all her apples and then I ate her. Like, I roasted her with all the apples and stuff. And then I went to the mountain, and then there were like mermaids on the top. And then it was really cool. And then on the 100th day, I didn't have to actually go down for 100 days. I slid. I made a sled out of this granny. After I ate her, I made a sled out of her and like the apples. And I just kept one apple. And then I slid down, and then I threw the apple at this gnome, and it gave me like a lot of gold after. And that's my story of how I kind of went up the mountain. And a lot of it is true, minus probably a few hallucinations, but that's really how it worked. The thing is with these stories is that yes, they are true. They're 100% true, and those people that ultimately got to be successful probably did even more things than what they say, but that's not how they worked all the time. So when Cowboy Tanaka says that 5 hours doesn't seem like enough and that he can't hold the 5 hours, what I would have to say to that is that there are periods of time when you do have to really push it and you do go beyond what you would normally do. But those are, again, that's just like the story of walking up to the mountain. That's only something that you had. That's, let's say, that period of 3 days when you didn't sleep, when there was like a storm. That's that part. But to make it sustainable, on the next day you probably slept in quite a bit. Maybe you recovered for a week after those 3 days. But you wouldn't say the story about sleeping for a week. You'd tell the story about how the grizzly bear was outside of your door tent door. Tent flap? Maybe had a door on your tent. It was the granny's door. Anyway, point of this being is that you will have to do some extreme stuff, most likely, and that's the price you have to pay to get to where you want to go. But at the same time, that's not the entire story. That's just a brief moment. And you can't that's not sustainable. So you can't possibly live in the storm. You can't possibly live with the grizzly bear outside your door. It would be unrealistic to say that for 3 years you had that grizzly bear outside your door. Even though I'm sure that some people did go through that story, and I'm sure that they did make it too. So whatever circumstances you are, that's just what you have to work with. You do have to make it sustainable though. That's the one thing that I have to say here is that, again, those stories are awesome to hear, but at the same time, those people, once they got the ability to not be in that situation, they weren't there anymore. The people that couldn't sleep or had to sleep less, work very long hours, do all that stuff, when they were able to not do that, they didn't do that anymore. They got their sleep, they got their food, they got whatever it is that they needed. They didn't do that consistently over, let's say, years and years, because it would become counterproductive. I'm going to tell you a few things about the brain now and why this stuff works the way that it does. The frustration, the inability to hold your interest for 5+ hours, that's completely natural. Whenever you're doing something that's complex, whenever you're doing a task that is requiring a lot of thinking, a lot of processing, you're consuming glucose. So your brain, even though it's like a small percentage of your total body weight, actually consumes, I think, up more than 20%. I think roughly about 20 plus maybe % of your total calories of all the glucose in the body. So you can't possibly just sit there and expect that. It's like an engine, basically. Your brain is like the CPU of your computer. Think of it as like that. It's like the most important part that consumes everything and powers everything else. So if you're using this thing, you're actually using a lot of the resources in your body. And this thing also requires a lot of maintenance. You have to exercise, you have to eat right, you have to get your sleep. This thing will not work unless it's pampered like a little pink baby that it is inside this encasing here. So you need to treat it like a king, and you need to know about it. If you're going against what it wants, it will punish you. It will punish you with frustration, with fatigue, with depression, with all of those things, because you're not listening to it. So understanding your brain is, like I've talked many times before, one of the most important things you could do. I recommend, just as a starting point, read Robert Greene's Mastery. And it's not really a book about the brain, but it has so many references in there. And just the process of becoming a master is so well described by so many different people that I think that you can't possibly go wrong doing that. Another one, Daniel Coyle, The Talent Code. An awesome book, more focused on the brain this time. A lot to do with myelin, about processing speed, how you get faster, how you get better. It has a lot of athletes in there, people from all kinds of fields practicing. What's effective practice? What do you need? Essentially what we're talking about here. What is effective practice? How much can you handle? How much can you take? And how much of it should you do? In the book, they say that roughly about 4 hours of deliberate practice is the optimum, is what you can handle. The reason for why you can't do 12 hours of consistent learning is, apart from your glucose being depleted, is that your brain generates your emotions through chemical signals. So at some point after 5 hours, your brain will have lost interest in that thing. No matter how interested you're supposed to be, your brain to it is just going to be like, okay, in this environment that we're in, there must be something else that's going to give us a greater payoff. After 5 hours, I'm sure there must be either some food, some entertainment, just something else that's going to stimulate a little bit of dopamine, give you a hit of interest, give you a little bit of adrenaline, anything to get you from just sitting down and doing this thing. Because after 5 hours, if you're in the wilderness or if you're doing anything outside, there's nothing that you can do for 5 hours without looking at your environment at all that's still going to be the priority. Like, there might be something around you, there might be something that you have to check. We evolved in an environment where there was something always going on. You can't possibly sustain attention on one thing for a very long period of time. Some people can. At some points in their life, they can also, depending on, again, how desperate or how intensely focused on something they are, just what different chemicals they're producing. But for the most part of your life, and for the most part, for most people, it's going to be that you need to have frequent breaks. You need to also have exercise, which, by the way, probably, I don't know if there's any other art tutorial channel that really talks about exercise and all this stuff, but exercise actually increases the rate at which your brain grows. And there's consistent studies about how much better athletes are at learning stuff. You might think that that's kind of productive because athletes are stereotypically dumb, but that may be just because they had to spend a long time just doing one thing. But if you combine those things, that's literally how you build super people. You combine the physical, the mental, and everything else together. Skimming over that part, not spending too much time on it. Understanding your brain, that you're basically regulating chemicals at all time, and that your brain is consuming energy, and it can possibly sustain focused attention on one thing for a very, very long time. 4 hours per day is what Daniel Coyle says in the book is optimum for most people. You can do more, but you need to vary your tasks. You can't, let's say, just focus intensely on just one thing for 5 hours and expect that 5 hours in you'd be still as interested. If you're doing, let's say, anatomy, then an hour on actual understanding of the connections of the muscle, an hour of just rendering, so you're practicing a different skill now, but kind of related to anatomy. So an hour of rendering, an hour maybe of just practicing your accuracy if you're still in those beginning stages of just trying to get everything down, an hour maybe of trying to do it from memory, an hour from maybe exploring animals now, an hour of comparative anatomy, looking then at morphing that into something else now. So like looking at creature stances, looking at something else, maybe doing some 3D, so maybe doing some ZBrush and trying to sculpt some anatomy now. So you could ultimately end up with, let's say, 8 hours, but those are varied tasks. That's not your brain just being hammered to death with one thing because you think you're supposed to be able to do one thing. When people say they work for 12 hours, they never said they did one thing. So don't feel bad if you can't do the 5-hour, 10-hour session. Go for a walk. What does it matter if you do 3 hours only and then you go for 10 minutes outside, run around a little bit, come back, your brain's refreshed, rebooted, you get all the chemicals, all the awesome stuff from the exercise. You can do another hour now, another 2 hours. What difference does it make that you needed the 10 minutes in between? So splitting up your practice, blocking it out, having very different things to do. Like I'm making this video now. Before that I was sketching. I'm doing this now because I couldn't do anymore, or I didn't want to. Then after I'm done, I'm going to do some more of that. Then I'm going to do something else. Then I'm going to do 3D, let's say. Then I'm going to do some painting. I'm going to vary the whole thing, and my whole day is going to be filled with this, but I'm not going to demand that I sit and do the one thing mechanically like a robot, because that's just not how it works. Okay, wrapping up now with some rest and recovery, and also a few little things about just when you're making those habits of making yourself miserable, becoming frustrated, generating anxiety, expecting too much, demanding too much, wanting it too fast. When you're doing all this stuff, you're generating cortisol. The more stress hormones that you generate, you damage the hippocampus, you damage parts in the brain that form long-term memory. There's really no use. Like, I've been someone that's been depressed for a very long time. I've had a lot to do with all this stuff. There's really no use for any of those emotions. Like, you might feel at a certain point that you're justified in thinking that way about your practice, that you won't get there, but unless you can actually use that as negative motivation that's going to make you better, then there really isn't much use to those emotions at all. They are ultimately toxic. And I'm not saying this is like hippie sort of toxic. I mean it as, well, not really neuroscience-y because I'm not, but I mean it as actually devastating to parts of the brain, toxic, as in generating excessive stress hormones that then dysregulate parts of the brain that damage other parts. So they truly are toxic. They do have their uses in small quantities, just like, let's say, sugar or coffee. You may use a little bit, but have too much and it becomes toxic, just like everything else, just like medicine even. So you can use them in a good way, and again, you can check out the long-term motivation video for some of that stuff. But really, they only have the, and if they're not useful to you, if you're not using them in a productive way, then they really have no benefit to you. So there's no use of you beating yourself up about things, because all you're doing is you're damaging even more, and you're losing the ability for that long-term memory. It's much better to actually work with yourself, understand what's going on in there, understand how to take advantage of everything that you can, and have some compassion for yourself, some rest and recovery. Do something that you like, whether it be a book, whether it be a game, whatever it is that you like, whether it be outside, just going out for a walk. Einstein used to go all the time, and just wherever he would go, he would be thinking about his problems, or he would be, I mean, like his personal problems, like his hair. I mean, that he was thinking about his physics problems. Or even if he wasn't, a lot of times when you're just outside walking, when you're doing a completely unrelated activity, your brain is still going over that stuff that you've done with the conscious part of your brain. So don't stress about it too much, even though I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, feeling like you can just do half an hour and be done with it. I'm saying push it as hard as you can and do as much as you can each and every day, and try and build more in, but try to do it in a way that's productive, in a way that's conducive to long-term usage, so that you can do this over and over, day in and day out. This is what I want you to think about. Do as much as you can each and every day, but in a way that's actually productive. Not feeling bad about not measuring up to some idea that's just been thrown out there, and it was never meant to be taken as this is how you need to do it. This may be something that you have to do at one point, but it's not how you have to always do it. I'm sure you could do the 12 hours as well, but that's it. You've done the 12 hours. Now go back to your 5 hours, because that will be more productive. Finally, your brain grows and consolidates memory while you're sleeping. So rest and recovery has just as much usage as the actual stress of doing the new thing, practicing that thing. You need recovery built in there, and you need a good understanding of yourself and how you function. So summing up, don't feel bad about not measuring up to some strange fantasy. Your way of improving is your own only. Your path is going to be different to everyone else's path. You might have to do the 12-hour day, you might have to do the 15-hour day, you might have to do that consistently for a certain amount of time. And it's good to do that to test yourself. But that, most often, is not the most productive way to do things. There are things that you can do in 12 hours. You could do mechanical, mundane tasks if you have a day like that. But if you're looking for a day where you're engaged, productive, thinking about things, learning new stuff, then you need your prefrontal cortex. You need your brain to be rested. You need to have had your sleep. You need to have your exercise, your good nutrition, and then you're ready to get started with it. If you can split your day into like 2-hour chunks and just know what you're doing each and every 2 hours with a half hour in between, you're going to be much better prepared for each and every 2-hour session, and you don't have to have 5 hours. In fact, so many studies say that it's better. The more beginnings and endings you have, apparently remember stuff at the beginning and the ending of something better. So the more beginnings and endings you have, provided that it's not every 5 minutes, the more and the better that you're going to learn. A lot of this stuff is counterintuitive. Don't feel bad that you don't know it. Research it, and don't use toxic emotions as fuel unless you're able to actually utilize them. From time to time, it's cool. If you're just having them as something that's depressing you and putting you down, there's no use for that. Find out how you work, and just find out how to work better. I'll see you soon.